Embrace your learning and teaching. It's publish or perish. Let's get published with Professor Shelley Kinash. And welcome to episode 4. In episode 3, Shelley addressed what is distinctive and different about higher education learning and teaching journal papers. But this episode is based on Wendy Laura Belcher's book, Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks, a guide to academic publishing success. Wendy's book was published by Sage in 2009, and you can find out more at wendybelcher.com. Shelley, let's summarize those 12 steps or weeks to writing a journal paper.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. This book is quite the find because Wendy's book has divided into 12 weeks, and it works, the suggested steps to writing a journal paper. So once you have already done your research, collected your data, and done the analysis, these 12 weeks or 12 steps walk you through how to get published, how to get your journal paper to the point that you can get it published. So step number 1, week 1, is designing your plan for writing. Step 2 is starting your article. Step 3 is advancing your argument. Week 4 is selecting a journal. 5 is reviewing the related literature. 6 is strengthening your structure. 7, presenting your evidence. 8, opening and concluding your article. So you can see that you write your opening or your introduction and your closing or your conclusion after you've written all of that other, so that you're really continuing on that major thesis and being clear and explicit and providing navigational cues for your reader. 9 is giving, getting, and using others' feedback. So just like we've talked about in previous episodes, it's really important that you invite critical friends in and get a review done before you submit it to the reviewers so that you can make those changes and edits. Formative feedback to those teachers out there. 10 is editing your sentences. So doing that editorial work that you would do in any type of writing to make sure that you have really clear, clean, easy to read a journal paper. 11 is wrapping up your article. So not in terms of writing the conclusion, but putting the spit and polish on it and making sure it's all done. And number 12 is sending your article and having a celebration. So one of the things that you can do with this, and that Wendy actually recommends, is to get a group together. And so we are doing that right now. And we have a group, a research club, who have a cluster of those people who are working together on these 12 steps and really cheering one another on, proving as critical readers for one another, etc. In the introduction, Belcher wrote, "The primary goals of this workbook," and it is a workbook, so you can write right into the book. So she has exercises and fill in the blanks so that you can do your planning and your scribbling right in the book as you're going. Or for those people who hate writing in their books because they want to keep them nice, she also provides those same templates and exercises on her website. So you can print them off and do them separate from your book if you want to. But what she says that the primary goals of this workbook are to aid you in revising a classroom essay, a conference paper, an unpublished article, a chapter or thesis, and sending it to the editor of a suitable academic journal. So in other words, this 12-week approach has not been designed to start from scratch, but to have the research designed and conducted and the writing begun in a different form and for a different purpose. So this is how you now transform it into a journal paper. So Belcher says not to let this throw you, because once you start exploring, you are likely to discover some crops ready to be sown into your journal papers. If you still don't have an idea, you can still participate, as there is likely a partner out there looking for a co-author to bring home a journal paper submission. And this is a great way to start your journal article writing, just like if you are a supervisor of postgraduate students or PhD or master's students, often what you do is start as an associate supervisor before you become the primary supervisor or sole supervisor. So you're mentoring here. So writing a journal paper with somebody else before you go off and be the lead author or the sole author. Here are some of Belcher's triggers to start thinking about what or which paper, which research project. Praise. Has a professor or a colleague, so as a professor if you're writing as a student, or a colleague if you're already employed by a university, ever suggested that you submit a text of yours for publication? Maybe you're a student and they wrote back on that, wow, this is this is publishing quality. You could take this further. If not, has a professor or a colleague ever suggested that a text you wrote was particularly strong or intriguing? So even if they didn't suggest you publish it, maybe they wrote such praise on it that you think, hey, I could turn this into a journal paper. Pleasure. So here's another trigger. Pleasure. Are there any texts that you enjoyed writing or researching and that you still think back on with gratification? So something that you just loved doing that you think, hey, this might be something that could turn into a journal paper. The third trigger is relevance. Do any of your texts address some aspect of a current debate in your discipline? In your recent reading or conversations, do you find yourself thinking of something you wrote and its relevance? So when you're reading about something in the conversation or in the higher education section of the Australian and you think, yeah, well, I know something about that, or I did something about that. So say you're writing about the problems that international students have and you think, well, I've solved part of that problem. I did this in my classroom and it made a huge difference to the international students. And you have data on that. That's a good trigger that you've got the fodder for a research paper. A conference paper. Have you ever given a conference paper? And here's a note from me, that wasn't subsequently published as a full paper in conference proceedings, because you do have to be careful not to plagiarize yourself, which is a real thing, or in other words, double dip, double claim. So you can't publish conference proceedings and then go and publish the same thing as a journal paper. It has to be substantively different. So what people often do is keep their conference paper more conceptual or theoretical, and then save the data that they have for the journal paper. So did you get a positive response from that conference paper? Did you get useful comments that would help you in revising the paper for publication? Here's another trigger. Thesis. Have you written an honors or a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, or parts of it? Are parts of it worth revising or focusing on for publication? So it's really important if you are writing a thesis, whether that's honors or master's or a dissertation, that you don't just leave it at that, but you do use that opportunity because you've gathered that data to also write journal papers. A rejected article. Have you ever submitted an article for publication and gotten a revise and resubmit notice or an outright rejection? Maybe it's time to dust it off and have another go. Because we are talking specifically about learning and teaching journal papers, here's a few additional triggers. So Wendy's book talks about journal papers in general, and this podcast series, these episodes are specifically about learning and teaching journal papers. So here's a couple additional triggers that you might consider about these types of journal papers. First, academic supports. Did you ever recognize a problem, an issue, or a challenge for students in academics? Did you then design an approach to resolve this problem and or put supports and services in place for the students that are academics? Do you have evidence that your approach, supports, or services worked? This is valid and important learning and teaching research, and you have the basis for an article that you can write up in 12 weeks. Another trigger is professional development. Have you designed and developed professional development for academics? For example, on assessment, feedback, education technology, technology-enhanced learning? Have you used an evidence-based approach to refining that PD? For example, over time in many offerings, did you use participant evaluation and feedback to revise and redevelop your curriculum, learning tests, and assessment? Do you have evidence that your approach is now having positive impact? Do you think that other academic developers and the academics they serve would benefit from hearing more about your process? This is the basis for a successful journal paper in academic development journals. Another trigger is learning and teaching citations or awards. Have you won a program, faculty, institutional, national, and/or international citation or award for outstanding contribution to student learning and/or teaching excellence? Have you been recognized for teaching in a way that is responsive, creative, and/or innovative? Do you have evidence to prove that your approach made a difference? For example, did student achievement increase? Did response rates and/or student evaluation of teaching scores increase? Did less students drop out or fail? Did more graduates get jobs? Did more graduates return for postgraduate study? If so, you have the strong basis for a high-impact journal paper, and your award nomination can serve as the text basis for that article.
Shelley, so many things to think about in that section you were just talking about. And one of the triggers that you talked about was academic supports. And I work with theatre students at times, and I work with masterclasses with those students. Some of the goals and some of the things that have come out of that for me and for the students are really making me think, should I actually be writing a journal paper here?
Precisely, Jason. I was hoping you were thinking that, because that's exactly my goal here. Let's get published. I'd be thrilled to help you work on this. So I guess if I was to pull together what you just said and heard from what I was rambling on about, here's a few pieces of practical how-to advice. 1, choose a text that has already been started as the basis for a journal paper, or if not a text, something that you've been working hard at. 2, commit to a 12-week program to have a journal paper ready for submission. 3, writing generates writing, so put pen to paper and begin. 4, find a group of colleagues to share learning and resources, to cheer one another on and to peer review one another's writing. And 5, rediscover the passion and prepare to have fun with academic writing. So let me conclude this episode by reading one more paragraph written by Belcher. She wrote, "Writing is to academia what sex was to 19th century Vienna. Everybody does it and nobody talks about it." The leading researcher on academic writers found that most academics were more willing to talk about even their most personal problems, including sexual dysfunction, than about problems with writing. The prevalent belief among academics seems to be that writing, like sex, should come naturally and should be performed in polite privacy. Because of this silence, writing dysfunction is common in academia. So playing on this metaphor, Jason, Alex Comfort wrote The Joy of Sex in 1972. Wendy Belcher's book, published in 2009, might be aptly subtitled The Joy of Academic Writing. Just like dieting and other health goals, it just doesn't work to wait for a Monday that never seems to come, or even for New Year's Day. Let's set the stopwatch together now. In 12 weeks, we'll have journal papers ready to be sent to the editors. Let's get published.